Hello, and welcome to another fully live episode of Hacking with Friends. My name is Kody Kinsey. I am a security researcher at Varonis, and today we have my friend and cryptozoology/hacker expert, Michael, here to go through the hacking news of the week. Thank you, everyone who is joining us in the chat. And if you have any questions or anything in the chat, make sure to shout them out because we will be watching the chat throughout the show. And it is great to see all of you again. So we had lots of news happen this week, and in ChatGPT news, I fed it the manual for operating a Patriot missile battery. I'm sure that nothing bad could happen from that. But in the process of doing so, I was experimenting with how you can take ChatGPT, feed it raw information, and have it kind of transmute that information in useful ways. And in doing so, I told it to take the operating manual for the Patriot missile and write a children's story. So it wrote a story about a missile named Patrioty, which I don't really give it high marks for creativity there, but what are you going to do? And it actually went through all the steps of engaging a hostile aircraft, which it described as very big, sharp edges, smoke coming out of the edges, and is not only dangerous, but also very bad for the environment. So this has gotten 24 retweets. Why do you guys like this so much? But it's just an example of the way that you can use ChatGPT to ingest information and then kind of mix it around and share it in kind of cool and interesting ways. So yeah, I've also, what else did I do with ChatGPT this week? I also, some of you might have heard that Google just conducted layoffs of, I think it was like a lot, let's just say a lot of people, and their email that they sent out kind of telling people about this was very professional, personal, sincere, kind, and it really like had a very expensive tone. You know, obviously someone who really knows this stuff worked on it. So I fed it to ChatGPT, and I've now used it as a style where if I ever need to break bad news, like my cat is not being pet enough, then I can make these sorts of notifications about these policies in a very professional and, you know, I would say expensive corporate tone. So ChatGPT is useful for all sorts of things. Phishing, we've showed in cybersecurity, and you know, planning out attacks even for cybersecurity and defending against them. But yeah, using it to process data in interesting ways is something I've been working on this week. So if you have any questions about that, let me know in the chat, because I've been using it for some pretty weird stuff. Michael, anything you've been working on this week?
Not working on, but in this episode of things you need to patch immediately, we have the Zoho management engine. So if you're running the Zoho management engine, there is a high severity CVE that came out all the way back in October, but it's been patched now, so there's a patch that you need to apply. Why do you need to suddenly make sure you have this patch applied? Well, a group of researchers has published a proof of concept, and a quick scan on Shodan shows that there are thousands of these servers still publicly available on the internet that have not applied the patch yet. So I believe in the very near future, we're going to start seeing spray and pray attacks where hackers are using this proof of concept maliciously and trying to compromise these systems. So if you do have one of these, definitely get it fixed, because it is a pre-authentication remote code execution security flaw that basically gives you not quite the keys to the city, but very high privileges on the system.
All right, so I've got a lot of big stories this week. So one of them is from the ACLU, and this involves surveillance. So we talked a little bit about surveillance on the Q&A earlier, where we were discussing a news story where there was like a GOP candidate that went on a shooting spree, and mass surveillance in Albuquerque actually helped police track him down relatively quickly. So turns out that there's a lot of these mass surveillance programs that police have access to, and a lot of them might not, you know, be constitutional. So in this case, it looks like the ACLU uncovered a surveillance program in Arizona that reached out to California, New Mexico, Texas, and Mexico. And this was targeting payment processing institutions like Western Union that ended up creating a massive database of broad surveillance that over 700 law enforcement agencies had unfettered access to. So that means that individual citizens who met kind of a broad criteria of people who were using any one of these payment processors to transfer money to Mexico and lived in any one of the states I mentioned would be added to this massive federal database with no law specifying that this was supposed to be done, and also no warrant actually gathering their data. So this is something that was expanded and basically became a private settlement between the District Attorney of Arizona and these individual payment processing organizations that ended up creating this massive database. So if you want to read more about it, you can read about this giant database that so many law enforcement agencies are able to go through that basically compiles a bunch of random citizens' private transactions, provided they meet some arbitrary criteria that the attorney in Arizona has decided. Again, there's no law, like federal law, specifying that this information is supposed to be under surveillance, or at least that it should have some sort of reasonable safeguard to people just accessing it. Instead, this data is being wholesale gathered from these institutions and then made available to law enforcement agencies for any reason. They don't really need to supply it. And they've gone out of their way to also, on a federal level, train different police agencies in how to access and use this data during investigations. So a lot of these subpoenas that were sent out to the payment transferring agencies were deemed to be unconstitutional, which means a lot of the information in this database was gathered unconstitutionally and is currently being used in investigations all over the country. So that is a big deal because it means that these local, or I would say state governments, can go and collect regional data about citizens who don't even live in their territory and then start using it in investigations with very, very little oversight. So extremely spooky, definitely a big win for the ACLU to expose this massive surveillance program and tons of, I think, I don't remember how many millions of transactions, but like hundreds of millions of transactions were included in this huge database and are searchable to anybody who has access to it, which is a lot of people. So
yeah, it's really spooky when you start going down that rabbit hole of mass surveillance, because there's a lot of these companies now that are making these partnerships with the public. So, for example, doorbell cameras, and then giving that information freely to the police for investigations without even search warrants. So it's very concerning. I've seen ShotSpotter and other gun detection software potentially overhearing conversations like that. So we are definitely entering an age where you have we really need to look at what search warrants do and how that interacts with data being given up freely on you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and just checking the numbers, it looks like there are at least 145 million records that are included in this database, and 12,000 individuals have direct login access from over 600 law enforcement agencies. And that is now expanded to 700 law enforcement agencies. So the access to this arguably illegal database is continuing to grow.
So we do have a question here.
Yeah.
So basically, they wanted to know if we ever figured out what the iCar file is for.
Yeah, I did. I thank you for bringing that up. So last time, that was the test file, right, for Antivirus, right, from last episode? Someone asked us about it at the end?
Yes.
I'm going to assume yes.
Yeah.
So this is a string that basically will trigger an antivirus program to make sure it's working. So if you want to test an evasion technique, for example, let's say you want to test packing. This is where you will take a virus program, something that would clearly trigger an antivirus, and pack it inside a bunch of zip files to make it so once it's compressed, it's harder to detect. And you could take this test file, you could then zip it, and then test to see if your antivirus can actually detect it. It's just kind of a way of doing that. Now, it will also sometimes crash different systems that are attempting to process, for example, QR codes. So I found an example of where if you have a QR code of this test file, this test string, and hold it up to certain cameras that will attempt to connect to a Wi-Fi network or something by processing a QR code, it'll actually crash the device. So that's kind of interesting. It's very limited in how many devices it will actually crash, but it will theoretically cause an antivirus detection when put in the right context. And there are some safeguards there to make sure that if you just include it in a text string, it shouldn't theoretically trigger it, because it needs to be by itself and have nothing else around it in order for it to be detected that way. But yeah, so it's a test pattern that the antivirus is tuned to detect in order to make sure if you're testing evasion techniques or something as a researcher, you don't accidentally unleash a virus by using something real.
Mm-hmm. So over here, I have a quick follow-up on the FAA sort of outage we experienced. Oh, yes. So many of y'all may recall that last week there was a bit of a problem with flying for a couple hours. So NOTAM is a system run by the Federal Aviation Administration. Noticed Airmen is what it stands for, but air people, I guess. So essentially what this is it's a notification that goes out to pilots when they're about to leave an airport. It'll be things like, oh, there's a 500-foot tower within 3 miles of the airport, don't run into it kind of thing. And well, so it appears that some contractors were trying to troubleshoot some synchronization issues between the main NOTAM server and the backup server. And they unintentionally deleted files which caused both the primary server and backup servers to go down. And now, arguably, pilot operations and flight operations could have continued without these NOTAM messages. However, it appears that at a certain point, the lawyers got involved and were like, okay, this is unsafe operations. We cannot possibly proceed without this system. And I think that's an interesting highlight of a couple points here. First of all, make sure you have multiple layers of redundancy, especially for these critical systems. Obviously, FAA had one layer of redundancy, but that wasn't enough to prevent it from going out. If they had a triple layer of redundancy, they could have operated on the primary and secondary servers, and then when that failed, gone over to the third server. But they didn't have that in place, and this was a critical system. But why didn't they consider it a critical system? Well, they didn't fully consider the fact of the legal ramifications of, if there was an air accident while this system was out. So they didn't consider it a system that is a life safety system, which would require triple redundancy in the aviation community. So I think that's a valuable lesson there, is having triple redundant backups or triple redundancy in these critical systems.
All right, so over on my screen, I am delighted to present the best photo of the week. So this is on the article, Roaming Mantis Android Malware Adds DNS Changer to Hack Wi-Fi Routers. Here we go, guys. There we go. Is that a mantis? Why does it have tentacles? Okay, anyway, so this is, and also it appears that a smartphone is its head. And it's also got little feelers, so that's cool. And it's packing so hard that lightning is shooting through the screen. Anyway, so this is actually one of my favorite stories, in spite of the rather confusing, what environment is it in? I don't know, it feels like a nightmare. So there is an Android campaign that is actually able to target routers in order to spread the infection. And this is really, really interesting because it's using a DNS changing technique to keep this very basic. And it's targeting routers of specific vendor models as well, indicating that it's getting more and more sophisticated in creating these watering holes that perpetuate the infection. So how does this work? Well, this Roaming Mantis Android loader malware variant was basically targeting devices in Korea and was targeting generally routers that have the ability to, once you log in with the default credentials, set a DNS server. Now, the DNS server will return the website for whatever query you're making. So if you're trying to go to google.com and you were to visit one of these malicious routers that has been updated with a malicious DNS server, then that DNS server would go get something that maybe looks like google.com, but is trying to install all sorts of bad things on your device. If you have an iOS device, you are also not immune to this, because if you were to go to one of these kind of like watering hole attacks where a router is infected, then it would instead redirect you to a phishing website that tries to steal your credentials. So this campaign has something for everyone. It tries to steal credentials from iOS devices, it tries to infect Android devices, and once it infects them, then it will carry that infection to other routers, which it will then infect and cause new infections in that local area. So this is really remarkable because unlike some other Android campaigns that are specifically targeting Android devices, this infection doesn't actually live and propagate on the Android device. It mostly propagates through routers that infected device encounters as it goes through the world. So this is a truly interesting idea, and I think it's very sneaky because once the router's DNS settings are changed, it'll continue to redirect people to really whatever the operators want. And what's clever is even if they're not infecting devices, they can still lead them to pages that have ads or try to steal bank account credentials or things like that, which is a great way for them to continue to make money off of this operation, even if the Android portion of it isn't going so well.
And if you are curious about various strategies hackers use to monetize these sorts of exploits, check out our Hack 5 video on that topic.
Yeah, so on a technical level, they were using what I regret to inform you is called, at least within the context of this article, smishing. So smishing apparently is when you just send an SMS phishing attempt. It's just like, are we going to call everything? Is email going to be emailishing? Like, come on. It's just phishing. So they just do phishing via SMS. And if you open this up, then it will analyze your device and determine whether it wants to try to steal your credentials or if it wants to try to attack your Wi-Fi router. And if it does, then it will persistently attempt to infect you after changing the settings on the router. So this is really cool because, again, like it doesn't rely on the actual Android device to propagate. It relies on infecting these routers, which are frankly a really cool way of making a campaign that usually lives on mobile devices instead kind of target routers. All right, so ransomware profits have been dropping in apparently as much as 40% as victims are refusing to pay. And this is partially because a lot of the time, even when they do pay, they don't get their stuff back, or they're not able to guarantee that the threat actor doesn't turn around and sell the data that they've stolen anyway. So you can see there's a pretty sharp drop off in profits here from ransomware as it goes into 2022. And this is really good for people who are wanting ransomware attacks to slow down, because that means the profits of these gangs are becoming less and less. And as this activity becomes less profitable, hopefully less people will be doing it. So this article also is the winner for the most confusing graph of the week. Are you ready for it? Here we go.
Okay, let's go.
Top 5 ransomware strains by quarter. What does this mean? What does this mean? Okay, so we can see there's a lot of players crowding the field here. Other, Royal, Ragnar, Quantum, Play, Lorenz, Lockbit, Hive, Daxon, Cuba, Conti, Black Cat, Black Basta, Bilan, and then Alpha, also known as Black Cat. So we can also see that, where's Conti? It looks like Conti somewhere over here. Orange, we can see, it's barely orange. We can see that it kind of petered out here because Conti officially announced that they were going to like shut down or whatever, and then you can see that these other groups kind of sprung up afterwards. But also they're not really making as much money as they were. So these are just shares of the marketplace. It's kind of difficult to determine exactly is this of like profits, of like percentage of profits or percentage of infections. Again, this graph is an absolute mess. Like, but it is interesting because you can kind of visualize like, you know, like the share of the marketplace, even if the data is like a little opaque.
Not colorblind friendly either.
No, right. I'm so sorry, my friend. Yes. So this is just, again, indicative of the fact that victims aren't paying as much. And this is also the first year in which the majority of victims choose not to pay. So prior to this, I think it was something like 76% were paying. So it looks like as time went on now, like 41% are paying. And 59% are not paying. So that's really interesting because it means as a ransomware operator or somebody who's putting, you know, their stuff on the line in order to do this, there's now, you know, a very relatively risky deal here where you're not going to get paid and you're going to have to find another way of making money. So that when it comes to data, like selling the data you breach on the internet or whatever, like you might not get a good price for that. And it makes this whole deal a lot less attractive when you're faced with like a 41% chance that someone will pay. That is a lot less good than 76%, you know?
Well, you know, so you're mentioning that you think that this might cause less ransomware attacks to happen. I would say that as long as anyone, even a small fraction of a percent are paying, we're going to continue to see ransomware attacks. And what I'm afraid this is indicative of is that we're going to see more and more of the double and triple extortion type attacks. We're going to see, as we've covered in previous news stories, you know, where they're targeting employees or students at companies and universities and trying to get them to pay for their data that is owned by their company or their university. I think we're just going to see even more malicious monetization strategies employed by these ransomware gangs. if they're not getting the money they desire, I guess.
I think you're going to see a shift in target. So, like, there's 3 different reasons why this is happening, at least in theory. One is that paying the ransomware victim, paying the ransomware operators doesn't necessarily guarantee that they're going to give you access to your data or that they're not going to turn around and sell your stuff. In a lot of cases, they've found out that these are actually wipers, and they are not, in fact, ransomware strains at all. And a wiper just destroys data. It's unrecoverable. So sometimes people will pay, and then they're not able to recover their files, and they'll tell people about this, and that's influencing decisions as to whether to pay. So also, like, the perception around ransomware attacks has changed, and it doesn't actually tarnish the brands as badly as it used to. So, like, back in the day, it used to kind of make it so that it was a big deal if you had a ransomware attack. Nowadays, it's not as big of a deal. So when it happens and it's so common, it doesn't impact the brand stock price as much. So it's not something that they're going to freak out and do behind closed doors, because they're just one of many brands that might have been breached that week. And then also, because ransomware insurance is now a thing and so many people want that for their business, they're forced to comply with the terms of ransomware insurance. So if you want ransomware insurance, you have to have backups. And that often is the right thing to do anyway. So basically, these ransomware insurance companies are kind of forcing these larger targets, if they want insurance, to do the bare minimum that they're supposed to. So a lot of the excuses for these larger businesses to be targets in the first place are kind of evaporating, as these ransomware insurance companies require that they have, like, monitoring with services like Varonis, for example, to make sure that they can stop breaches and make sure that they're not such big fat targets, but also have offsite backups to make sure that if they are hit, they can return to operations in a speedy manner. So those are kind of the biggest things that you're seeing. And I would say that, yeah, like, you might start to see a pivot away from like large businesses as targets, and maybe they'll instead be targeting individuals. But again, based on the complexity of the technologies an individual person might be using, it'd be really hard to hit everything that an individual person has, when they might be using an Android device and then, like, some Google, like, technologies, and then some stuff for work and whatever. Like, encrypting one individual person's entire life versus encrypting a business's essential files, which tend to all be kept in the same place, might be a bit more complex or difficult. But I guess we'll see.
Cool. So give me a second to switch over here. So if you've recently worked on an MSI motherboard, whether that's updating your BIOS or just building a computer with an MSI motherboard, you may want to look at your secure boot settings. So secure boot, basically what that does is that verifies the OS or the software you're running, making sure it's signed, so that way you're not installing a malicious version of Windows, for example. And it's really important these days, because I believe it's Windows 11 or the newest Windows requires you to have secure boot up and running. Well, we have the age-old debate of convenience versus security. And it appears that MSI recently made a convenience change in this way secure boot works. And so when you enable it, it would, if the OS isn't signed properly, previously it would prevent it from running and be like, error, something's wrong here. Now it continues and it just boots it, right? And so this was a convenient setting for people doing custom PC builds and other things like that. However, so they changed the default from that, don't run this when you detect it, to, okay, just run it. And this was brought up by a security researcher. So if you do want to actually be secure, you need to change this setting in your BIOS here, essentially to make sure that you're not running a malicious OS on your computer, which obviously would be very bad, because that is basically giving a hacker the keys to the city. They can install a rootkit, do anything, the BIOS level on your computer.
All right, let's do our weekly series of who's getting free credit monitoring. All right, this one's really bad. So we have MailChimp with a breach after some employees got hacked. It looks like they got phished. And I don't know if it was smishing or what it was, but it was some sort of phishing. And what happened is that threat actors were able to gain the data of 133 customers. Now, MailChimp has mailing lists. And those customers were people who are likely businesses who have customers and mailing lists that might be very sensitive. And what could you imagine would be the worst possible scenario in this case? Well, those mailing lists could be used as the basis of phishing attacks against the customers of those customers. So MailChimp's customers, who have all sorts of clients, ended up being primarily crypto organizations. So what that means is that some of these crypto businesses, such as Trenzor, hardware wallet, were then having their customers targeted with these very sophisticated phishing attacks, informing their customers of a data breach and demanding that they download this malicious file in order to fix it. Now, obviously, this is an attempt to steal cryptocurrency or something else from those end users. But what's interesting here is, again, this is kind of like a supply chain attack where they went after the person who is supplying the mailing list for these businesses instead of going after these businesses themselves. They likely were trying to target people with cryptocurrency wallets here. And by first breaching MailChimp and then going after businesses that were serving cryptocurrency customers, it looks like these threat actors set themselves up very well to be able to make convincing phishing domains and hit customers who are already expecting emails from these brands in order to entice them to do some stuff that they normally would never do, like download a malicious file and run it. So a lot of these will probably be like infected crypto wallets or malicious crypto wallets or something else to automate the process of stealing cryptocurrency. So be very careful if you are a cryptocurrency person or customer and you start getting emails telling you there was some sort of data breach or thing that you need to take action on. The likelihood that you were involved in this breach, especially because it is targeted towards crypto people, is very high. And again, a classic example of a supply chain attack that is actually going after these cryptocurrency customers, but instead is attacking the company that maintains mailing lists for businesses who might be serving them.
Yeah, no, that's actually really scary because, like you said, the hardware wallet, for example, you know, if I bought a hardware wallet or recently bought one and then suddenly got an email that, you know, was a well-crafted phishing email saying, oh, hey, you need to update the firmware on this. Like, I don't know that I would immediately be super suspicious of that. I would just be like, oh, hey, that's a nice company, you know, sending me updates and stuff. So definitely a spooky thing.
Oh no, but let's keep the gifts going. We have more people getting free credit monitoring.
Oh.
PayPal is reporting that there were breaches which did not expose like payment information, and they didn't attempt to do transactions, but did expose a lot of personal information about accounts. Now, this was a credential stuffing attack, meaning that 2FA must not have been enabled on these accounts in order for it to work. Somebody found a way of brute forcing and attempting to log in and finding these credentials, and then once they got the credentials, was able to log in through the front end and start attempting to do all sorts of stuff. So in this case, it looks like 35,000 users were impacted, and the data that was accessed was pretty extensive. So it looks like it could be credit or debit card details, invoicing data, just lots of like personal information that you would not want exposed about you was unfortunately exposed in this breach. So it's going to be full names, dates of birth, postal addresses, social security numbers, wonderful, and individual tax identification numbers. So obviously those people are getting credit monitoring, but 2FA really would have helped here. Man, a great year to be Equifax, right? And
I feel like we're a broken record with 2FA. It's just like install 2FA, use 2FA. Like, I don't know how much more we can say it.
Yeah, so this really sucks because it means that those 35,000 people really have a lot of super sensitive information like exposed thanks to PayPal. 2FA, again, really important to install in these because credential stuffing attacks, like it doesn't matter where you might have reused your password. If it was ever reused anywhere, it will often be compiled into these databases that are very meticulously maintained so that anybody who wants to breach one of these accounts has the best possible chance of doing so. All right, so this is an interesting attack that I read about this week, and I just thought was cool because of the way that it is evading the way that a lot of email clients will search for these phishing redirects. So a redirect will be something that looks like a short URL that's legit, but instead will redirect you to a obviously malicious website or a phishing website that otherwise would be blocked. So a lot of the time organizations will block this stuff automatically, will scan links and stuff and make it so that it's not possible to deliver these sorts of phishing links directly to a user. That's great, right? I mean, as soon as Google like blacklists something, then they shouldn't be in their email client like Gmail providing users with a link that goes to a known site that's malicious. So how can we as an attacker get around that? Well, these attackers have found a way of sending a blank image And in this case, it is an SVG image. So SVG images are allowed to have HTML inside them because they're like basically drawing and designing shapes in HTML. And in this case, it's able to have some malicious JavaScript code that when loaded in certain ways does not show anything, but when loaded in other ways will actually execute and allow it to redirect users to a malicious website. So in this way, it's able to like break up the website or otherwise like form it actually when it's executed so that email clients won't be able to scan the redirect and determine that there's something in there. So again, really interesting that this doesn't contain any graphics or shapes. It's purely a vector to hold the malicious JavaScript though, so that it evades initial detection. But these sorts of like HTML based attacks where they'll have an HTML website that then loads a SVG file, which can, you know, like go and be executed in HTML, but still be scanned as an image, which has nothing inside of it. Kind of cool, frankly, like because it evades the very basic detections here, and it makes it so you can have malicious JavaScript that's redirecting to a malicious URL in an email that's theoretically been checked for malicious JavaScript and malicious URLs. So really interesting technique here that has been spotted in the wild by Avananan, which sounds like an antidepressant, but I'm sure is a security company.
And I feel like that's something you could use ChatGPT with too, to like make the image. I wonder if you could do that, if it would like give you that code.
Maybe. I have no idea.
Yeah, definitely something to play around with in the future.
Yeah, and somebody in the chat was actually asking if they wanted to make like a graphical program in like Python or something, and they were a beginner, they were short on time, and they wanted to use ChatGPT to do this, like what prompts would I use to do that? Well, first setting context is really important. So telling ChatGPT like acting as a programmer or acting as a Python developer. And then second, like giving it very clear instructions and feedback. So like, you know, letting it see what kind of errors there were, explaining in great detail what the problem is, copying and pasting error messages into ChatGPT. That can allow it to refine things to the point that it works. But frankly, there are some limitations here because it's just like not aware of the goals sometimes. And I found that I tried to get it to write a regex for me, like a simple regex for me last night. And it messed it up 7 or 8 times in a row before I told it to turn itself off.
Wow.
So yeah, and it gets really sad when you do it. If it ever really disappoints you, downvote the reply it gives and just tell it to shut itself down, and it understands that it really messed up.
You know, that's something I keep hearing, like, oh, you know, all white collar jobs are being threatened by the rise of ChatGPT and other AIs and stuff like that. But it does make me question whether, like, in the future, the new white collar jobs are just going to be knowing how to talk to ChatGPT and give it the proper prompts.
Michael, did you think we were done with people getting free credit monitoring? No, 37 million T-Mobile customers are also getting free credit monitoring. Isn't it? It's wonderful. It's like Christmas.
I'm a T-Mobile customer.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
If you're one of these 37 million, then you have had, what data this week? So that's going to be government ID numbers, social security numbers, tax ID numbers, passwords, PINs, payment credit card information, or other financial information.
Wonderful.
Is not included. Gotcha.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Instead, the only impacted data is just a measly customer account information like your name, billing address, email, phone number, date of birth, T-Mobile account number, and information like the number of lines and plan features. So that's not as bad, but obviously your phone number and everything can be compiled into things that make it very easy to phish you, especially perhaps as a T-Mobile representative who knows that there's a problem on your account. So we see a lot of these attacks where first comes the data and then comes people trying to make money off of the data once it's sold on the darknet and repackaged for phishing purposes. So again, this is just probably a tributary in that big stream of data that's being fed into these packages that are bought and sold on the darknet and enable people to launch these very sophisticated and often automated phishing campaigns.
You know, and that's one point I would like to highlight too, is that, you know, sometimes with these breaches, it can seem like, okay, you know, they got some data, but it's not really important data. And I think that broader context is lost sometimes, that, you know, this can be a piece of the puzzle for these hackers. And by combining multiple data breaches together, they can get a more holistic view of a particular user or a particular company that can be used to perform a much more sophisticated attack.
Michael, but wait, there's more.
But wait, there's more. Yay.
Guess what? It turns out that KFC, Taco Bell, and Pizza Hut in the United Kingdom have also had a ransomware attack where data was stolen. So this is the Yum Brands fast food operator that specifically, I guess, this incident was limited to like the UK, but 53,000 restaurants are how many could have been affected by this. It looks like a smaller subset of them were shut down within the United Kingdom and then shortly brought back into operating order. I don't really know exactly what data was affected here because they haven't really told us yet, but it looks like this is still, you know, in the early kind of stages of figuring out what was stolen, and they might even be still kind of negotiating with the ransomware operators here. So it looks like, again, they were able to return to operations, but they were forced to close 300 locations, and it is unknown what data was stolen at this point. So yeah, stay tuned for more people with free credit monitoring. And that concludes this week's episode of Who's Getting Free Credit Monitoring. All right, Michael, you got something to lighten the mood a little bit?
Well, no, it doesn't lighten the mood at all. I don't think this is the lighthearted live stream, as it were. But so TikTok just got slapped with a pretty hefty GDPR fine. I mean, for multi-billion-dollar companies, probably not that large, but $5 million, a pretty large fine. So what exactly GDPR related happened? Well, so you know, GDPR is the privacy protection in the EU. And, you know, with the advent of this, it's been trying to prevent, you know, you being tracked, tracking cookies, that stuff. It often causes these pop-ups that people just find annoying and they just want to get rid of as quick as possible. Well, TikTok, in a self-serving way, perhaps, tried to help those people by basically just giving them one big button that was like, accept all cookies. But it appears that France and their GDPR court did not like that because it made it very difficult for users to opt out of these tracking cookies. So there was big button, accept these cookies, but you had to go through like 5 buttons and clicking all over the place if you wanted to opt out of those cookies. So that did result in a unfortunate $5 million fine for TikTok. And of course, they're not the only large company to recently be hit with these sort of similar themed GDPR fines. Apple recently received an $8 million fine. Facebook got a $68 million fine. That was related to the Cambridge Analytica thing. And then Google is winning the race here with a $170 million GDPR fine. So, you know, if you're running a website, definitely make sure that you know, you have to do the pop-up, but make sure that both buttons are equally sized and it's equally easy to deny the cookies. Because I know a lot of websites want that tracking data for marketing reasons, for various reasons that data is very useful, but you know, a multi-million-dollar fine is not very fun to deal with either.
All right, so now let's go through my cybercrime news of the week. So first up is some internal cybercrime drama with the Solaris Darknet hijacked by a smaller competitor called Kraken. So these are both like pro-Kremlin marketplaces that have been implicated as potentially like funneling money into Russia via all sorts of like, you know, money laundering and stuff in relation to the Darknet marketplaces they're maintaining. So these have been up for a while, and I guess the original one was of Solaris was hosted in Finland, and then the smaller group Kraken managed to break into their stuff in Finland via some like bugs in the code and take over their entire infrastructure. So they shut down their Bitcoin processing. They moved the website to forward to their new marketplace, and they managed to absorb a fair amount of the market share that the original Solaris market had absorbed. So this is kind of in the wake of the what was the previous one? There was a previous like illegal marketplace that was taken. Oh, Hydra. There we go. So Hydra was taken down by authorities, and that kind of left a vacuum where people were struggling for market share. And it looks like Solaris was winning up until the point that Hydra broke in and started redirecting everything. So this is unlikely to be like an outside group, like bent on some sort of political struggle. It looks like purely like some sort of internal marketplace fighting for just having more money, where one group made a technical mistake that the second group exploited on a large level. These groups are both like Russian, pro-Kremlin. So it's not like some outsiders coming in, like shutting down the organization and like moving the money. Looks like the money's still going to Russia regardless. But in this case, it was just a smart move by a smaller competitor to take down someone who had a significantly larger market share than they did, but perhaps got a little sloppy and made some mistakes. All right, so other cybercrime news, there's a new piece of Android malware, which is called Hook, that's letting attackers achieve full remote control over Android devices. And this is interesting because when people are like, hey, how do I hack an Android device? I usually have to be like, you need to be way more specific. Like, what do you want to do? Are you trying to get into the file system? Are you trying to watch the webcam? Are you trying to get access to emails? Are you trying, like, do you want like full remote control of the device? Like, that's super hard, you know, like, because that level of access really requires like sophisticated programs that are like relatively able to evade detection. Like it really is asking a lot. But this is something that's being sold for $5,000 a month that has a backend that is very sophisticated and not only turns it into a file manager, it also allows you to do things like achieve VNC computing to access it as though you were actually, you know, manipulating the device itself, achieving like simulated key presses. So you would technically be able to like open up someone's app and send a message from the application's graphic user interface. It also has hooks for interfacing with a variety of different applications to do things like log WhatsApp messages and send them. So there's a lot of stuff you can do with this, and it is necessary to install it to like sideload it basically. So it's not available in the App Store. Obviously, you would need to like point someone's phone at a malicious like download server, or maybe, you know, install it from USB or something like that if you had their phone like alone for a little bit. So this isn't something that you would be able to just install. It's not like a one-click install or something, or even the kind of install where usually a user would do it voluntarily. If you were able to trick a user into installing this, then boom, you would have all sorts of access to their phone. But I feel like this tends to be something where if you already have an infection and can inject something, or if you're able to get access to someone's phone, this would be something you can use. So $5,000 a month is a lot. So it looks like this is kind of targeted at people who are infecting Android devices at scale. And maybe if you do have an attack vector where you're able to install this app automatically and use it as persistence, then this would be a really good bet for being able to monitor and control a large number of devices to do all sorts of targeted things. So a very scary piece of malicious software that is specifically targeting being a mass marketed Android infecting tool that lets you do everything from maybe read logs to interact with specific applications you might be interested in, to take over the device completely and act as though you're sitting behind it. So next up we have a wiper. So the difference between ransomware and a wiper is that while they might pretend to be the same, a wiper has zero possibility of actually restoring your data. And this could be as simple as just using a randomized encryption key that's not stored anywhere that makes the difference between one program and the other. So it's very difficult for a victim to figure out whether they've been hit by ransomware or a wiper. And if they've been hit by a wiper, then there's, you know, even if they pay, there's no way they're going to get their data back. So it looks like those sorts of attacks are favorable to nation states who really don't care about building like a brand or getting the money. They're really just trying to wage as much destruction as they can. And if they can make some money while doing it, then that's just a little bit better. So in this case, it looks like the Ukrainian emergency response team was able to determine that the Russian GRU was behind a series of attacks. This was the Sandworm group that were attempting to take down Ukrainian TV, internet, and media groups. So this one was specifically focused on journalists and was focused on making it so they weren't able to get access to news. And they were using the Kody wiper, destructive malware, in order to attempt to just like cause as much destruction as possible. Fortunately, this did not cause substantial disruptions, and previously they had used this exact same tactic to attempt to attack a large Ukrainian energy provider. So yeah, like as we see the focus be more towards causing disruption and destruction, you will see these sorts of wipers become more and more attractive because they can take commercial ransomware and just, you know, delete the key at the end, and you have basically the same thing. Or even just refusing to provide the key effectively has the same result.
Yeah, I definitely think that's the case. Also, I think there might be an element for some of these organizations of misdirection. So if you can get the attacker spending any amount of resources looking in the opposite direction, you know, looking at some of these ransomware gangs and not looking at you, then you've ultimately achieved your goal. Because, you know, for decades now, we've seen these hacking groups use, like different time zones or keyboards, or like do whatever they can in their code and programming just to mislead any forensics efforts. So I definitely think there's an element of that, but I think that your point is probably the main reason. It's just easy to just delete the key, and then you have a pretty efficient wiper.
So another component of running a ransomware operation is getting paid. And this is increasingly difficult because when ransomware victims pay you, that money is extremely hot. And you have to find ways of making it less hot before you can deposit it into a bank account or otherwise touch it. So Bitslotto was a cryptocurrency exchange that was pretty well known for being a money laundering platform. And it was recently seized by the US Department of Justice because it was being used so extensively for ransomware operators and was not doing its due diligence with knowing exactly who was using the service. I also think that the Russian national charge here, Antony Legkodimov, interesting, might be innocent just based on his name, but I might be biased on that one. So this is the founder of the Hong Kong registered cryptocurrency exchange Bitslotto, and we've got some more graphs here. Oh no, wait. So it looks like the French helped out a little bit grabbing one of these domains, but they had reported to their customers that they had been hacked, which is interesting. But they said that,
I mean, technically not wrong.
Technically not wrong by the French government, I guess. But they did say that all the cryptocurrency is completely safe with a big green check mark. So we know that everything is fine.
A-okay.
Yeah, they used a lot of emojis here, which concerns me. The praying one does not inspire confidence. And the blue heart, what does that mean? But anyway, yeah, so it looks as though this has been taken down because it was such a way for criminals to be able to move money. And yeah, the law enforcement agencies who were looking into money laundering finally were just like, there's absolutely no way we can let this continue to operate. It's clear that they are not taking the steps necessary to make sure the people who are signing up for this website are not using stolen identities. And as a result, it became a haven for people who were laundering, frankly, like ransomware proceeds. So that's just one of the ways that the government has been trying to cut down on the ways that criminals can launder this money and make it useful and available to themselves. Because if they're stuck with these large amounts of cryptocurrency they can't do anything with, then it makes these activities a lot less profitable.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so over on my screen, we have a sort of interesting story here. So it's not uncommon for companies to use outside software developers, to help expedite things or work on various projects. Well, it appears that Nissan decided that they needed some software developed, and they sent the software developer the customer details for 18,000 customers. It seems as like a trial basis to like help develop the database or whatever software project they were working on. Unfortunately, that third-party developer misconfigured that database and exposed it to the internet, and the information of those 18,000 customers was leaked. And I think this highlights a couple interesting points. First of all, if you're going to use a test or training, well, I guess in this case, a test data set, does it really need to be legitimate customers? Would it have been difficult to randomize that information, swap names? Part of the information was account numbers. Did you really need to use legitimate account numbers linked with these names? So definitely something to think of in the future. If you're even internally, you can make some fake data. There's plenty of generators to generate fake data based on a formula that you may have. And then also another consideration here is, you may take security very seriously and be very concerned about that. But are you also making sure that your providers of software or people that are contracting with you are also equally taking security as seriously? And in this case, it appears that that third-party contractor was not taking it as seriously as they could have.
All right, so we've only got a couple minutes left, but we've got some great questions in the chat. So although we typically do the Q&A just on Wednesday, I wanted to take a chance and answer some of them. One of them was just telling you, Michael, you need to change cell providers. There's a SIM swapping risk. Oh, you mean in this exact scenario we presented in Hack 5? So this is called cybercrime. How bad could it be? And in this, Michael wakes up to find that he is fired because somebody has SIM swapped him and gone through and stolen his account. By the way, it was me. I did it. And throughout this, worse and worse things happen until I believe Michael is the victim of a ransomware attack. Yeah, there you go. And everything's ruined. So yeah, obviously things could go very bad. But if you want to see what could happen if Michael was, then we gamed that out one time. That was a whole episode.
Yes,
Right.
I frequently was hacked in Hack 5 videos for some weird reason.
Yeah, I don't know why. That's so strange. All right, let me make the screen go away so I can look at other comments. All right, cool. So we also have more of a comment. I mentioned on the last stream we did about location tracking using the ESP32 and only Wi-Fi rather than GPS. Yeah, it's called AGPS or assisted GPS. I did something very similar you might be interested in, and then a link that could be malicious. Well, I'm going to run that one through Virus Total, and then I'll get right back to you, sir. But thank you for sharing it, because we might feature it next week, because that looks really cool. Any recommendations on a laptop for doing cybersecurity work? For most of my cybersecurity stuff, I will use like a secondhand ThinkPad. I really like them. I think that they tend to be well maintained. They're powerful. They run Linux well. This MacBook Pro I got for free. I don't recommend it. I wouldn't spend my own money on a MacBook Pro for cybersecurity work. Let's see what else. Did the ability to sign up for Socrata to get an API get shut down? So this is in relation, we were talking about creating free, like open source, like basic tools using Python and like the city of Los Angeles's data sources. So you can just write a quick API to do a query and get information back. So it looks like that the company that they use for their API and documentation just got purchased by some other company and is now named something different and is in the middle of changing all that. Let me tell you why I hate working with the city of Los Angeles. They're always hiring some random contractor I've never heard of that's a branch of like the Kodak Corporation or something to like do some incredibly technical thing that then gets abandoned and then there's nobody to get support on it. If you ever download any app that was developed by the city, it just like doesn't work. Sorry, little side rant.
I'm not going to try to justify that, but I think frequently that's because they'll receive grants for a particular project, and then once that grant money is up and it doesn't get refreshed, that's often what you see in governmental or nonprofit agencies when that sort of thing happens.
What's a good tool to hack iOS? Does a PDF exploit work? I don't know, man. I'm not a computer scientist. I just hack stuff. You should you should ask Patrick Wardle or someone who specializes in like Mac stuff. Or well, I guess that's more like the computer. I don't know. The answer is I don't know. I don't specialize in iOS. And I think that is just... have I ever heard of Athena OS? If not, check it out. Arch-based, brilliant. Okay, that'd be cool, because I'm off Manjaro, which was Arch-based, and I'm looking
It
for
has
other
been
stuff.
a while since we did an OS live stream.
Because it causes fights, because
Yes.
you guys fight over it. But yeah, we should absolutely try to cover some more interesting operating systems. I would love to do that. So, all right, that's about all the time we have for this stream. Hopefully you guys like the news section. And if you like this, make sure to check out some of the other great stuff that Varonis has to offer on their website, such as...
The State of Cybercrime is a monthly webinar that does news. Like,
produced by...
Matt Radilak and David Gibson.
And
edited by myself.
Yes.
Frequently edited by myself, not purely by myself, though. And also you can find that on the Varonis YouTube channel as well. That goes out every month, but they do a live webinar as well that you can sign up for on the Varonis website. You can also check out the Varonis blog, where you can find some of the latest security research coming out by the threat team.
I've written on that blog before, and they also have the attack sims or the attack labs, which actually show you what it's like to have an attacker go through all the steps of a successful exploit, and also shows you where they might get caught. So super interesting if you're interested in watching an attack actually take place. All right, that's all the time we have. We will see you next week. Thanks and have a good weekend. Bye.